All right. Hi, welcome. We're here with Chad Haag from Southern India. How are you doing, Chad? Welcome.
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm Griffin. This is Ryan.
Ryan, yep.
I don't think we even introduced ourselves before. We're here in Detroit, Michigan, and we're just talking about anti-tech stuff, trying to talk to anti-thinkers such as yourself and spread the word and get some of the stuff less stigmatized, I guess, so to speak. But I don't know, if people that can't work on fixing the problem if they don't know there's a problem. So let's talk about the problem a little bit.
So to begin, Chad, you're in India right now. So what drew you specifically to India?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to have this discussion with you. To be honest with you, the first thing that drew me to come to India was the fact that this is the home nation of my wife. Now, we had thought about living in America, after we were married, but after I'd actually experienced life in India, I realized that this was exactly the kind of place which I wish America was. For years I'd fantasized about my ideal version of America, largely based on John Michael Greer's novel Retrotopia. He has a hypothetical image of Toledo, Ohio in the year 2065, in which you have a higher quality of life, and really a higher standard of living for many people, precisely by using less technology, using less fossil fuels, doing things by hand, using tools which we've known actually for centuries that they work perfectly well. We just feel that they're not an option in modern America due to an irrational prejudice that anything more quote unquote technologically advanced is the thing you have to use, even if it gives you poorer results, causes more environmental damage, and puts more people out of work. So I noticed things in India like, the neighborhood butcher. I keep about 15 chickens in the backyard, and time comes to butcher a chicken, I can just walk down to the butcher, pay $1.50. He'll slaughter the animal. He'll cut it up into exactly the right pieces you need to make a chicken biryani. It's an amazing, it's an amazing improvement over going to Walmart and getting a bird from a factory that lived for about 6 weeks and lived in such dangerous conditions that you'll get very bad food poisoning if it's not fully cooked. As this bird from my backyard, I can eat slightly pink, and it tastes better. It's cheaper. It's such a great, and this is the sort of arrangement which we could have in America. We just feel that we can't. And I became very interested in examining the philosophical reasons why we have this sort of mental block in America. This led me to study people like Ted Kaczynski, Jacques Ellul, John Michael Greer, Pentti Linkola. And really, the channel emerged after I had already had this experience. Most people don't know.
That's awesome. So I guess we were asking too. I know you've probably told the story a million times, but if for those that don't know, what is your little tale of how you were kind of like, I don't want to say driven to India, but there was a motivation, right?
Right. So CNBC interviewed me in 2018. I was involved with Alan Collins, who's the founder of Student Loan Justice. I was very active, very enthusiastic about the sort of work that he does with really seriously trying to get student loan justice. Rather than, the forgiveness programs we currently have, which like 99.99 something percent of people get booted out of. Most people who are in the, income-based payment programs or the public service forgiveness program, you teach in the inner city of fill in the blank, and then you get your $150,000 forgiven. Almost all of the people who think they're going to have it forgiven that way actually find that they're booted out of the program. So in contrast with this sort of pseudo solution to the student loan crisis, Alan Collins was basically the only person who was really serious. So I was deeply involved with his work. And he was also speaking to a lot of reporters. So CNBC actually contacted me when I was in India, and they interviewed me about how I had, in a certain sense, come to India to escape my student loans.
Yeah.
And that's part of the truth, but that certainly wasn't the only reason. Now, they wildly exaggerated certain things, like they took a picture of me riding an elephant at a tourist park and made it seem that I do that every day because I'm just living in the jungle, like Tarzan.
Seen that picture. Oh, it's hilarious.
Right, that's actually at an elephant park. It's a tourist site, but they're making it seem it's not quite as ridiculous as Rooster magazine in Boulder took a picture of me wearing a turban when I was in northeast India, which is all the way on the border of Bangladesh. It's as far away from here as you can get within India, and they made it seem that was the kind of clothing I wear every day.
Right, you just gave up on America. Now you're just a full-fledged Indian, right? It's all because of student debt. That's the story they told, right?
Well, the reaction from people was something along the lines of, well, it was only $20,000. Okay. But when you live in India, you realize how much money $20,000 actually
could get you. Yeah, exactly. No, I was reading to touch on that point. Like I was reading about it was something about Kenya. I wanted just some random article about Kenya, but it was but the people only make $2 a day on average. Like, how do they afford Nintendos? And somebody was like, yeah, but $2 in Kenya is 3,000 here. That's the equivalent purchasing power. So people just vastly misunderstand the the money, the monetary based system we live in, where they don't when you go to when you're in places like India, where you talk about you have these aspects of self-sustainability that have been co-opted in America by the monetary system, right? Where we don't spend the money to raise chickens here, we get money to buy corpses, right? And that's what we exchanged our labor for money for things that traditionally you would produce in your own home or produce locally or pay a butcher because you already raised the animals, right?
If you really think about the kinds of expenses you have in the United States, many of them are completely meaningless. $2,000 a month for rent in the city of Denver. Okay, and I'm not talking about for a nice place. That's just basic. Right. You have hundreds of dollars every month for insurance, for which, if you actually have, say, a car accident, the main thing they'll focus on is how to get out of paying for it. Okay, yep. You've got health insurance, which they don't also, when the time comes to help you, they get out of it. The student loans, that once again, that is a completely meaningless drain of money every month for something which, even when you were in college, most of the courses you took, at least in my experience, you didn't really learn anything. The professors saw it as the challenge was, how can I not teach you for 50 minutes? Just sort of give you some busy work, think, pair, share, pass the time, and then you still have to pay for this 30 years later. The difference really, as I always try to tell people about my experience living in India, is you have expenses here, but they're far more meaningful. You mentioned $2 a day being, pretty much enough in Kenya. Well, I think the average person in the nation of India lives on maybe less than $1 a day. There are some parts where agricultural wage laborers, for example, will do an entire day's farm work for 80 cents. Okay. And you think about this as an American as an impossible amount of money to live on, but that's because you're imagining that they have the same monthly rent, $2,000 a month. You imagine that they have the student loan payment or the insurance or, even vehicles really drive up the cost of living in America unnecessarily so, because you have to spend, $200 a week on gasoline because the suburban sprawl leaves you with no choice except to do that. But the infrastructure in India, and I would assume Kenya as well, it is such that you don't have to have an extraordinary amount of money for mostly meaningless things like I just mentioned. If you do spend money, it's on things like, vegetables. You can get a whole week's worth of vegetables in rural India for just $3. And I don't even really do that anymore because at this point I'm growing about 80% of my daily vegetables just on the roof. And you can have a higher standard of living precisely by dropping out of the system, which costs more money, and living on basically a few dollars a day, as I did for much of the time I was in India, the only source of income I had was book sales. And I didn't sell that many books when I first started in, say, early 2019, but even just a few dollars a day was enough to cover many of the things which I actually needed.
Yeah, that you actually like hit on exactly what I was thinking about too. Like that, it comes from this warped view of what like the standard of living is supposed to be, and we live in this society where our the resources that we consume like are way more than necessary than like are necessary to survive, and that's like why we live in a country where we expend more resources than we would even be able to produce in our own country. So that's why we have to go to other countries and start using their labor, and then you get like these global networks start happening, and more of the issues on that point. But I did want to ask you because we were recently watching some of your videos, and one of them that we watched that we found absolutely hilarious was when you were reading academic papers that were just completely terrible and repetitive and circular, and
then they always talk about the it's like watching like a bad 80s art student film, like the space in between, like that whole like it's metaphysical drivel would be like.
It's like,
oh my God.
So like we're both in grad school programs. I'm trying to I'm in a PhD program for philosophy, and he's in law school.
Mostly because it's free.
That's and so we related to that pretty heavily because
that's actually a point I want to touch. It's like a lot of like and Chad, I guarantee you will have a lot to say about this. But like it seems like a lot of like academic philosophers are just like confined into these boxes because they're afraid of they're
specializing too hard.
Yeah, they basically specialize like scientists do. And then you end up with like, I have this theory about IBE that can solve 3 problems total. And then you're like, great, that's your life.
And that's your whole career. So like, I wonder if you could say, like, what do you think is what's missing from the way academia is done in the West, and why it's creating these terrible papers? What is missing? What does it need?
Well, I think if I were to maybe name one factor of many as maybe being the most important, I honestly think it's the lack of enthusiasm. As ironic as that might be, is the people who write these dissertations are not even that interested in their own theories. Honestly, when you're in graduate school, at least my experience is, you've noticed that most graduate students spend more time and more energy maintaining their Twitter account than they do their own doctoral dissertation, right? They're more interested in what they're posting on social media, which, let's face it, is mostly just retweeting Democrat politicians and people like Sean King. I mean, it's kind of an unwritten rule that that's what you're using your social media profile for, is when you quite frankly go out on the job market, is you want to show that to the public. They're more interested in that than they are in developing their own theories. Mm-hmm. And this is why it takes so many years to finish a dissertation unnecessarily. It's not that long, really. It's less than 200 pages, including the works cited page.
Which
in
is
many cases.
Thing. Yeah, I mean, if you just throw it up at the wall, you can just stretch these things out. Like, if you need, like, you can just stretch them out for like, hey, I found this one theory that really you can do so much with these dissertations, and it's like,
but it takes 5 years.
Yeah, realistically, should take you like at best like a year of like dedicated work to do it. 200 pages in a year seems more than doable,
Well, I mean, my own experience, if I may say so, is I wrote a 382-page book, The Later Philosophy of Pentelicula, in 70 days. It was 70 days from start to finish.
Boom, there you go.
What's it? Like Dostoevsky wrote The Gambler in like 20 days because he was broke, like he needed money, so he had to write a book. So he just threw out a masterpiece in 3 weeks, and that's just one of the greatest that he ever did. So, there you go. Like, if you're passionate for what you're doing, I mean, so
it's a lack of passion.
It's a lack of passion. It's just like these people are like, I think this is like generally speaking to an issue with like academic glut, where like 50 years ago, like higher education was still relatively limited by who came in. But since we started exporting every single job and the kitchen sink, there's nothing left but college for most Americans. And then they're just stuck like getting degrees and
not knowing
nothing, just nothing, just paper. It's just paperwork, and it's just this massive service industry. It's a disaster. That's
so
what it is.
so I wonder, do you have any ideas for like what is why isn't there any passion? Like what do you think there's a core reason why there isn't passion? Is it because people just aren't they're too distracted by like their social media and things like that there's no room for like passion to seep in, or do you think there's something else going on too?
Well, if you consider the handful of professors who actually have an extraordinary amount of passion for the subject and spend many hours trying to provide the best education they possibly can, there's not many of them. And I noticed myself that the only professors who really fit that model that I had were all people who got their doctorate degrees in the 1970s. I'm talking like 1975. Several of these people I can think of are, quite frankly, already passed away. That's how old they were. And the other two have retired. So the kind of people which I have in mind largely don't even exist anymore. They're either, unfortunately passed away or they've retired. And the people who came after them all are noticeably different from they. And there's a book about the sort of business changes which occurred in the 1980s, which explain this. I think it's called the 5-year party, right? The 5-year party, why college has given up on even trying to educate your child or something like that. And what happened was college administration didn't really exist in the days of the people I'm talking about, the 70s, the 60s, etc. If you had administrators in the college, they were largely just teachers who had to take on some extra paperwork out of obligation, basically. And they were scholars, you know what I mean? They were people who had spent their lives becoming experts in Plato and Aristotle and things like that. Okay, they were that kind of people. In the 1980s, I think largely because that was about the same time you see massive outsourcing, factories shutting down, people laid off in all over the country. It's about that time that suddenly you have a much larger market for people who are being forced to go to college. And it's not a coincidence that at that time, the business model of the college changed. You bring in administrators who are actually not scholars in any sense of the word. They are simply corporate hacks who come from Fortune 500 companies, and they're brought to the university with the sole purpose of maximizing profit. And they bring their understanding of how business works to the college, and they actually restructure the curriculum such that anybody who tries to teach college the way these people I just mentioned from the 70s would do, where you're actually reading Plato, you're actually doing the Greek etymology, you're actually citing all kinds of scholarship relevant to the topic. Those sort of people would be eliminated. Now, the people I was fortunate enough to study under got out of that. They escaped that because they had already gotten there and gotten tenure decades ago when that was still possible. It wasn't. They were like barnacles, is the name for them in academia. You can't get rid of them because they're already grandfathered into the system. But once they die or retire, you just never see people like that again, because the only people who will be brought in are people who are able to produce sound bites which are so easy to digest that even a hungover, functionally illiterate, half asleep 18-year-old kid sitting at the very back of a lecture hall will be able to pick it up during lecture and then, work it into a 3-page
right. They got their phone. Maybe there's a laptop that they're on Reddit with it,
Right. They're watching Netflix. They're watching Breaking Bad during class. But they're still able to pick
video games. They have gaming computers. They're just setting up like, I don't need to pay attention to this shit. I got an exam.
Right.
Right, and those are the kids who show up. I don't know how many kids show up, but I think... Right. I mean, I think when I was in college, say 14 years ago in 2007, I think the average attendance rate was like 50% if like a freshman level lecture hall class. So
that's nuts.
It's funny because Heidi, one of our good friends, like she's going to medical school. We're all going to grad school at the same time. What a wonderful, terrible experience. So in medical school, like people don't go to the lectures because like you have like they just force feed you information like 8 lectures a day. It's hell, right? But so nobody goes to lectures anymore because they don't have the time to watch all of the lectures in one day if they went to them in person. So so something like only 3% of students were attending lectures, and the school had sent out an email like right before COVID, became super serious. They sent an email like, oh, we're gonna start making like lecture attendance mandatory because it's depressing professors that know, like, the professors are getting depressed that no one is coming to class. And it's like, well, no shit, like no one cares about this. Like you're just force feeding them.
It's like they're just repeating Wikipedia at people too. It's at some point.
Yeah, it's like hyper effective Wikipedia. Yeah, that'd be a great way to put it. But
yeah. it's become technicized in a way. It's like you said. It's like digestible sound bites, and it's like a diluted version of what it should be. Yeah,
and it's seeping back into like the educators, where like. No,
they're becoming complacent as well.
I mean, we had fellow students in our grad classes that like they could barely string, you know who I'm talking about. They could barely string together like a written sentence, and you're just like, how did you make it this far? Like, was anyone vetting this process? Like, did you apply? Like, it's.
Yeah, and I think the issue gets worse obviously when people feel this. Like I'm glad that you mentioned how it used to be in like the 70s and 80s, because I was always told by professors like how awesome college was back then, because you would just kind of go to this building and there would be like, some professor sitting on a lawn just kind of reading, Plato or something, and you just kind of sit and listen and absorb it, and people are there to learn, they're not there to get a job. Now people are there to get a job. So like I think I wonder, do you see some of that happening too, that there's this shift in focus for what education is even for in like a technological society?
Yeah, I mean, I think of Chris Hedges mentioning that having taught in Ivy League university, so it's not just the state party school with 50,000 students on campus. Even Ivy League universities, from his experience, is really not any different. It's an incredibly low enthusiasm. Students are only interested in getting the A so they can get the high-paying job. And he found that the best place to teach is actually prison, because in prison, you have people who are learning really just to improve themselves. They're trying to turn their lives around, I guess, after hitting rock bottom in a certain sense. And those are actually really the best people to teach. These people have so much enthusiasm that he says they turn their jail cell into like a little a library, right? And I think about the way that education has become so corrupt in the United States that even like a so-called top university really isn't any better. And this is largely because the kind of thinking which a technological society in particular needs is the kind of thinking where you're not really thinking anything. Okay, it's actually seen as a technical problem if you study people who really challenge you intellectually. Like, you don't read Fichte really in any university. You don't read Thomas Aquinas. You don't read Gadamer. You don't really read Hegel. When I was in graduate school, we only read the slave master dialectic, and the professor was.
That tells you what communism is, and then you skip over everything else Hegel ever did, and then there you go. That was my college experience with him as well.
Right, and the professor who maybe argues, oh, this is just about communism. All you need to know is that Marx was influenced by this, end of story. They miss the point that Hegel's understanding of industrial production was craftsmen working with hand tools. Hegel really didn't have capitalism in mind when he was talking about this. But that's the kind of education you get, in which, like, when I was in graduate school, the professor did so little preparation before class that she actually showed up and said, abstract negation. He's talking about abstract negation. Why is it abstract? I'm realizing that abstract negation and determinate negation is like the most basic thing in Hegel. That's like not knowing the world of ideas in Plato. And I mean, it just confirmed to me that like they've basically given up on even trying. It's come to be understood that you don't have to really know what you're talking about or to do the work to study the subject beforehand in an intensive manner. Really, you're just the graduate seminar has basically become like a corporate boardroom meeting. The purpose of going to class is not to actually learn the subject, let alone to discuss it in a serious manner. It's simply to build social capital. You show up to class in order to kiss the right person's ass, in order to get access to the research assistantship, the TA, the funding, the job placement later. That's what you're really doing in class. And this is because the kind of thinking which the technological society needs, in which you don't think, but rather you find a way to basically game the system for unearned wealth at a time when technological automation has basically handed all the real work over to machines. The only thing which humans really can do in such a society is find ways to work their way up these sort of hierarchies using only the most crass methods of social manipulation. And that is extended even to the people who are supposed to be professional thinkers.
There's something I wrote, because speaking about like this specific topic, I once wrote a paper, this is years ago now, but I wrote a paper about like I was talking about how if you looked at like the job structure of America today, if you ignore all the people that, so if you ignored everyone over 18 that's unemployed, which is like half the population of people above 18, you have about like 150 million like workers, people that make money in the United States doing jobs. And like, so I compared it to like pre-industrial, like I compared it to pre-industrial agricultural societies. I was like, look, back in the day, it was like an 80-20 ratio, like 80% agriculture, 20% in the cities at most, and that's how the system existed. And then so then I just went to the labor demographics. I was like, I wonder what it looks like today. And so out of like that 150 million people, something like there's only like 8 million manufacturing jobs left, like 8 million people working in factories, and then like military stuff. And then everything else, so like the other like 120 million people were just various, like I call them money trading industries. Like there would be people that like outside of like lawyers, like professional jobs, there would be people that worked in like insurance companies, like something like like insurance for medical is like 18 million people are employed by like medical insurance. Like that whole field of work is like a sixth of the American working population. And it's like we have this system in place. Like one of the biggest impetuses to change is that like the system is built around like these like basically service jobs, right? And like any sort of like change where we remove more and more service jobs from the economy, like we're literally like destroying the basic system that's in place. So like, I always thought of that being as like a big like roadblock to like positive change in America, like to undo some of the damage done, is that like if they even started to undo, so like if they started like changing health insurance to be something like not so exploitative, it would bankrupt millions and millions of Americans that would not have jobs. Like their entire jobs would be obsolete. And then what do you do with them? And
because they don't actually produce anything.
Yeah,
their job is just to maintain the system.
They maintain the system and trade money around. And then that's just like 80% of jobs in America are jobs that basically do that. And
do you what's your impression of like what that percentage might be in India, Chad? Do you have any idea, or have you thought about that?
It would be hard to put a number on it, but I can say that many more people in India will be employed at any given place you go relative to what you'd see in the United States. If I could explain that maybe a little more clearly, if you go out somewhere in India, you'll see a guy working the gate. His job is to open a gate. And as an American, you say, well, why didn't they just automate that, right? But that's the point, is they needed that guy to have a job. You have a parking lot attendant. There's a guy in a parking lot who shows the person driving where to park the car, helps them get out. That's, I wouldn't say, well, I guess it's automated in the United States in that the traffic lights tells you how to leave, even like the parking lot of Walmart. And that's the thing, is like we have this selective attitude of universal automation in the United States, in which any job that's actually physically done by somebody who has a real skill, we invest so much resources into making sure that it's taken over by a machine, even if the consequences are bad. In fact, self-driving cars have already started killing a number of people. But we still accept that as inevitable, that every truck driven within the United States to deliver goods to Walmart will have to be driven by a computer. But we have this other sector of the economy in which, even though jobs ideally could be automated away quite easily, like stockbroker, banker, to use John Michael Greer's own examples, we still caution everyone that would cause an economic crisis. We say, oh, but if those people are put out of work, there will be bankruptcies, and then there will be a crisis of they won't psychological suffering and existential crisis of not knowing what to do with their lives. Well, it's to the point now where even if the technical fix is implemented, such as on Wall Street, where over 90% of trading already is done by AI, the people in the service still get to keep their jobs. Like Jim Rickards noted when he worked on Wall Street, showing up to work meant playing golf because they had to do something with their time while the computer was handling the trading. So they just amused themselves and collect a paycheck.
Well, you brought up infrastructure, and you talked about how in India, like, there's not that large of an infrastructure, right? And I wrote a little note for myself. I was thinking, like, in India, how is, like, I'm thinking of, like, so let's say you're in southern India and you want to get to New Delhi. How do you get there within a day as cheaply as possible? Like, India has a really good rail system, right?
Well, I mean, the train system in India is such that if I were to travel, I live basically all the way on the southern tip, okay? And New Delhi is pretty far north. Yeah. It's kind of like, south of the Himalayas. It's a very long distance. I could ride a train for $50 from all the way on the southern tip to New Delhi. I remember being in Chicago and spending like $50. It was Los Angeles. Sorry, I was in Los Angeles and I spent $50 to ride an Amtrak train to Orange County, like an hour south. Right, and it was the Amtrak service is always like an hour late in the United States anyway. So it's
because right, it's clearly they do whatever they want. It's terrible.
Right, it's a clearly inferior service and product for a higher price, and that really is a microcosm of life within the United States overall. It's so much more expensive, and yet the quality of everything you can care to name is so much worse. Even just food, like we have this stereotypical image of third world poverty, right? There was a vlogger who was mocking India when COVID was coming here. He said, "Oh, that's a nation so poor that you get all you eat is rice and blah blah blah." Well, he's missing the point that the rice here is so much more nutritious that even if I have just a bowl of rice porridge for dinner and 2 eggs from my backyard chickens, that's enough. Whereas if I go to say like McDonald's in the United States, it's like $10 and I'm hungry a little bit later because it was not what it seemed to be. Most of what you were actually consuming was chemically rearranged corn and soybeans, right? It's not even just beef put between 2 pieces of bread in the increasingly loose sense of that term. It's actually, it's a technological simulation. You're eating super cheap materials, including even like they put sawdust in hot dogs and things like that. You're eating this, right? You're spending so much more money for something which is literally not even what it looks like. They just trick your 5 senses into thinking that it's food when it's not even that.
This is something we literally talked about yesterday when we were talking about garbage, remember? Where so like in America, like everything that you buy in America is like, not everything, but I'm going to say like 99% it comes in a package. 99% of the things you get in America come in a package.
Yeah, plastic box, cardboard box, like, something. Yeah,
everything is this. Like, it's such a bizarre thing where we don't have manufactories in this country anymore, but everything is manufactured. Like, how's that? I'm just saying.
What were you saying about trash though?
Okay, okay. So basically, that America's solution to we have all these manufactured goods, and what do we do with all this waste, like this packaging waste? We'll just compress it into a landfill and hope to God this doesn't bite us in the ass in 50 years. That was like, that's literally what we do. There's a giant freaking floating pile of trash in the Pacific.
So I think like you both got at this key thing of how, Chad, you use the term simulation, and I love that word for it because it's for us, what's real is just what our 5 senses can take in. So if we can replicate whatever the 5 senses get when we eat a hamburger, as long as we can replicate that sensory activity in however you want to define it, then like, boom, it's the same thing. You shouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's like,
it's the same qualitative experience, but at this deleterious quantitative effect on you as a person.
It's like this illusion of experience. People want experience itself, and they don't care what means they get it. So if it's a technical means and they get that same experience that they want, or they're told that it's the same experience and that they shouldn't detect a difference. That's the thing. It's like they're being bullied into agreeing that this is a satisfactory experience. Like I bet if a small child eating like a garbage hamburger for the first time would probably not enjoy it. I feel like there would be some kind of like genetic revulsion to like what you're ingesting.
Well, like how do you distinguish like the artificial from the real, like in a simulated society in a way?
Well, I think we are able to. I think the question is, why is it that we want to tell people out there that this technical version of the world that they're being fed is not the real one? Many of them realize it's not the real one and they don't care anyway.
Or they realize it's not the real one, but they don't know like what the real is. They're like, all right, so if like all this like factory farming is evil, well, what do I eat? Like, where's food from? Like people don't understand like what farming is. Like literally, it's just like the basic ingredients of society. People are just like, it's
yeah. So like, I guess what would be something that you would tell a person like that, Chad, that like doesn't understand why the artificial isn't the same thing? They don't get it. Like, what would you say to them?
I mean, that's a very big subject in that I wrote a 668-page book basically on this topic. And one of the things that came up as I was writing the book was this was right around the time that COVID was, really becoming a serious like worldwide lockdown. Even India was in lockdown at that time. If a lot of people were talking about the very questionable origin of food within China. There was a story really from more like a few years back that resurfaced on gutter oil, which in China is oil made from collecting raw sewage out of manholes, and then they process it in illegal factories, and then they repackage it as deep fry oil. So you go get cheap street food in China, in some cases anyway, and you'll find that it was actually deep fried in human feces, right? And Joe Rogan watched this on his program, and this guy used to host Fear Factor, right? And even he was like, I just basically threw up in my mouth watching this. This is the most disgusting thing I've seen in my life. Well, the same people who are basically watching this, if I may say so, like a pornography of like third world disgust. They're also like Vice News came to India and just showed people open defecating into rivers, right? And they would show people drinking out of the same river someone else just open defecated into. And you watch this as Westerners, a certain pornography of third world disgust, like, oh, there's people eating and drinking feces in the third world. I'm so lucky to live in America, is really what they're trying to get you to think. These are the same people who, if you tell them that there is literally cow manure in the hamburger patties, which they don't even bother to remove, they just add a layer of ammonia filling to basically sanitize the burger from within. These are the same people who would basically react to eating feces themselves by saying, well, what do I care so long as I don't have to smell, taste, see, etc. the manure? Basically, if it doesn't enter the stream of the five senses, even if I know that it's really there, I don't even care, is basically the point we have reached.
Mm-hmm. You actually bring up, I call it the purified water paradox, where people in the Western world, like this is true, and like people in Detroit, they don't drink the tap water. The tap water is poison.
Oh, especially because we're near Flint, and they had the whole
Flint.
water crisis.
People don't even know why. Don't even get me started on that, because that's just like, that just comes down to people trusting dumb dick legislatures. But that's besides the point. But basically, it's like people are like, oh, I only drink purified water. I wouldn't drink tap water. And it's like, how did your genetic line get to this point? Like what did your ancestors drink like 3 generations ago before like I'm throwing chemicals in water to purify it? Like,
I'm not that old, and I remember when like bottled water first started like becoming a thing, and I remember like my mom like being weirded out and be like, I don't think we need that. We have water at home, right? And, now it's like you're weird if you don't.
It's this weird like obsession. Like the West has this really bizarre obsession with cleanliness that seems to not actually be helpful.
It's almost like it sounds to me, just like talking about it now, that it's almost like the inverse of what you're talking about, Chad, that it's like they they don't like they're told that there's like germs and that there's like this bad stuff in the water that might be totally fine in order to it's like instrumental in order to sell them something else, like something about like how I've heard that advertising was really heavy in selling bathroom products to people because before people just didn't wash as much, but they were told over and over that they're dirty and they're terrible and there's all these like these germs that are going to like harm you and that you have halitosis and people really talk about you behind your back and you don't know it. and
well, that just comes down to like the nature of like when you're in this like massive mass media society, like advertisements are great on the senses. You get these little 30-minute sound clips. Bad breath makes all the bitches hate you. Like, damn, everyone's gonna be convinced by that. Like that's what happens. Like, and we've been an advertising-driven society since the war, basically.
Yeah,
That's
so
really
so
what we
they'll
got good at.
so people will consume things for experiences that are totally intangible, and then the experiences that are tangible, they'll take the artificial versions because they're more efficient, and they don't care because they're getting. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting it mixed up. Do I need some clarification on how I'm describing it, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about water, I am somebody who, according to the UN, does not have access to clean drinking water. According to the UN, the state in Kerala with the least number of people with access to clean drinking water is my own state. And they say that because most people here get their water from a well. I've mentioned before that, I didn't really have to invest a lot of money to go off grid in India because there is no grid in the village. There is no water grid. There's no city water. You have no choice except to get your water from a well. Okay. And the irony is the UN is saying that I'm technically somebody in the third world with no access to clean drinking water, whereas the well water from my own land is the cleanest water I've had. I used to obsess before I came to India about this fear that, the water there is so bad. You see these documentaries on, people open defecating into rivers, like I just mentioned.
Cholera's running rampant in India for the 50th time this year. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I had so much anxiety, and I actually lived in India for some time, and then I went back to America, and I just made some coffee with tap water like I had done for years and years at my old family home. And that's what actually made me sick. It was ironic that I went back to America and that's the water that made me sick because there was so much other stuff. I don't want to say like germs. It was probably more like a very questionable sort of chemical substances.
Like birth control chemicals that everyone flushes that shit down the toilet. Yeah, no, I mean the water supplies in America are just like, we don't have bacteria.
We have tainted. Yeah.
We have things smaller than bacteria that we don't even know is in there because like we can't test for 80% of this crap because we just started using it like 10 years ago. Oh man.
Unforeseen consequences. Yeah.
Literally unintended consequences. Yeah.
So like I think like we often get to this point where we're like, oh, here's another thing that is has been instituted or like just like stuck in society and integrated, is the word that I was looking for, integrated into society, and there's these unforeseen consequences that come of it. Like I think my favorite one that I usually talk about is like automobiles, that like there's some story that my professor would tell me about how when automobiles were first like being invented and somebody would get a car and drive down the road and ask their friend like, hey, you need a ride to work? And he's like, no, man, I'm in a hurry.
I got a horse. Yeah. The horse does the job.
But then we started like building our cities around this idea. Do you have like a favorite like invention or just technological device or something that was made that was integrated and then there were these terrible unforeseen circumstances,
but now we just like live with it as a matter of fact, like that's just how it is now? So
yeah. like what's one of the key ones for you?
Well, it's very hard to think of only one, but one that I've personally grown to try to get away from as much as I can is just the internet itself, to be perfectly honest with you. I remember even when I lived, in the United States, I actually canceled my cell phone when I was working as a medical courier. Mm-hmm. And without having a cell phone, without having social media, I noticed that even just the downtime at work. So as a medical courier, you get an order to, pick up a box of blood and take it from a blood center to a hospital. And when you're done with that, sometimes you'll have a little bit of time. You're waiting in the hospital parking lot for another order. Okay, it might be 10 minutes, it might be 30 minutes, whatever. The first reaction most people would have to that situation is, okay, whip out Twitter and see if there's anything new. And without a cell phone, I would instead take out a book, mostly from the library. Didn't even have to pay for it; it was just a free book, and I was able to read so many books just waiting for appointments, waiting for assignments at work. It's an amazing amount of time which you could use to do something else, but instead it's wasted. I remember training my replacement for this job before I quit and moved to India, and we had about an hour of wait between jobs. And she whipped out Facebook, and I could tell how frustrating the whole process actually was for her. She was trying to have fun, but you could tell just how boring it actually was to sit there and keep scrolling down looking for something. And it's interesting that people do this by choice. They spend like $100 a month to have that cell phone service. They don't do all the things they would otherwise love to do because they feel like if they have that 10 minutes of time, they have to use it on social media. It's this idea, as Jacques Ellul says, that it's not even that you enjoy one activity more than the other. It's actually more enjoyable to read a book during those 10 minutes. You just feel this on an option because a newer sort of technique has replaced another and has made it so obviously inferior as to no longer even be an option. Yet that is not because it satisfies humans' desires any better, or that it's better for the environment, or so many other issues. It's rather that technique has its own logic of development, which is completely indifferent to the existence of us. In fact, it's reached the point now that the existence of humans has become a technical problem.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. That's a really good one, because I think we all think about social media a lot, especially in like this day and age where it's become so central, especially given like you and I were talking a little bit over email about how COVID has been whether or not it was intentionally caused by anyone, it definitely has been co-opted in this way and used as a way to push technology further into people's lives, where now, like, I used to love going to see live music all the time, and now I haven't seen one since before COVID because it either isn't worth it, they only let like 10 people in,
Yeah.
or what most people do now is like you pay to watch it online, and I'm like, why would
you buy like a subscription basically?
Why would I pay $10 to watch a concert on my laptop? Like that's totally not the experience that I'm looking for at all. But people being reliant on social media, and you get at like this. I don't want to necessarily call it an anxiety, but I think it's like this motivation that I have, and I think that it's a motivation that most people have that want to act or want to live like a moral, ethical life. Is they recognize that you have a limited amount of time and energy in your life, or you can think about it day to day, but even just in your life, you have a limited amount of time and energy. And why it may seem like you're just spending 5 little minutes to check my phone, but that those minutes add up. You could have read an entire book over the course of a week with those little 10-minute chunks that you decided to look at Twitter instead. And then you would actually possibly be a better human because of that, or you will at least have learned something and like maybe found a passion or something like that, just in critically engaged in anything at all. But like it's the issue is it's taking people away from true experience and then giving them nothing in return. Like I can't tell you how many I have like a bunch of my roommate plays like a lot of video games, and like I have a lot of other friends that play a lot of video games too, and they use it a lot of the time to socialize. And I think this is something that I hit. It's like a wall that I hit with a lot of people when I try to bring up these issues about social media, is that they say, well, it's not taking me away from the experience because I'm socializing with all these people that I'm not otherwise have socialized with. Like, what I wonder, what is your response to that reply, to that worry that people say, like, either like I'm creating great relationships with people like from all over the world, I'm connecting with people really far away that I wouldn't have otherwise connected with, and I'm connecting with people in ways that I might not have otherwise. Maybe if I saw that person on the street in real life, I wouldn't have talked to them, but in this world I am, and so that's better. What would you say to someone that says something like that?
I mean, to a certain extent, it is true that social media allows a type of communication with with people that can be meaningful. All the way from here in India right now, we're able to have this discussion, and that is a good thing. However, I think that the connection between the social media simulation of, I don't know, interacting or communicating with others is something. The simulation was something which was intentionally engineered by people at social media headquarters to become something of a substitute, not even in a kind of hermeneutical level, like replicating the kind of meaningful discussions you would have, but rather on a purely technological level. What I mean by that is they invested a lot of money and time into examining how exactly to artificially stimulate the human body to release the same 6 biochemicals I guess you would get if you had that sort of interaction. I'm guessing, to the extent I understand it, if you were to leave home and run into a friend, right, and get to talk to them, you'd probably have those 6 biochemicals released. If somebody were to come knock on your door unexpectedly and you have a pleasant discussion with them, those 6 biochemicals released. They found a way to get you to release them even if there's literally nobody on the other end. If you have bots mass liking something when there's literally nobody on the other end, they can still make it seem on a purely physical level that you had that experience, even though you didn't. And the truth is, most communication which goes on over social media is not meaningful in the way that, what we're doing right now. Is most communication over social media is really just retweeting sensationalism, usually really of a political variety. That's what social media, in my experience, before quitting, had become. It was just a political outlet to retweet memes or really viral news articles like, oh, you'll never believe what this Republican senator did this time, right? And you get likes from people who are like-minded. And it's not meaningful discussion. And even if there's a comment, it's likely to be just as sensationalist. And I really think that although they might have mimicked the physical structure of that sort of experience of communicating, they really haven't captured anything really beyond that. That's why no matter how much social media you use in one day, however many likes, let's just say you're a prolific vlogger who can get hundreds of likes in a single day from uploading a video. Quantitatively, or I rather should say qualitatively, it's still less meaningful than just one interaction you might have of the kind I just mentioned of actually running into someone in person.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's like these layers of communication that are removed step by step. The deeper the deeper the communication gets technicized. Where I think about it where it's like you have regular talking, you have like the full spectrum of communication. Like noticing body motion,
Well,
like body language.
Yeah, no,
and
because
like
body language is itself, like just touch on that, body language is itself like a vast majority of communication, because like language came way after human interaction. Like, so like we were already playing the game before the word game was invented.
I can't tell you how many arguments I've got in with girls because I misunderstood something that was sent over text message, or they misunderstood something that I was trying to convey through text message, because you're trying to communicate and in like these deep ways but after removing like several levels of communication. I was like, okay, you don't see my face anymore, so we'll just talk on the phone. It's like so you don't get any of the body language, but at least you can hear my voice, you can hear inflections and things like that. But that's kind of messy sometimes. Let's just remove that. We'll just go straight to texting. So we'll all just talk like robots, and we'll reinvent the language so that you can get my meaning through text. In like that's kind of like what it seems like. Emojis and like video chat, we're trying to like reclaim that. It's like we went down to texting and instant messaging like AIM back in the day, and people realized that there was like an absence, that they were missing all those levels of communication. So then they started making emojis like, oh, I can like kind of get those facial emotions back.
I can make this sarcastic by adding a certain emoji, and that changes the tone of the whole thing.
Or I can do some, like I can reinsert body language. It's like, oh, or I can make it video. And so now you can actually like see my face, but there's this weird delay that happens, or, oh, you got frozen for a second and your face looks all weird. Or like, so it's trying really hard to replicate it. And it feels like it like got further away, and now it's getting closer, and it's hard to tell. It's like, as I think as we all probably agree on, it's really not. It may not have its path planned out. It's just going along the path of efficiency wherever that may lead. And Chad, we're like we've been talking for like an hour. I don't want to keep you too long. You've written a lot of great stuff. Like I've been reading Hermeneutical Death, and it's been great. I think that you do a really great job of like making some of this stuff approachable.
Palatable.
Palatable and approachable for people that maybe aren't as familiar.
Yeah, because a lot of the issues with like talking about anti-tech stuff is that it sounds very doomer would be the word I'd use, where it sounds very like negative,
or just very like academic heavy sometimes. And I think you have a good voice for Chad, and we appreciate it.
And like having and like your like explanation. I mean, I loved your story about like the third world in the water. But like you're not you're basically a UNICEF candidate according to the Western world, right? And it's just like and it's just great. Like people just have this like I think like a big issue in the Western world, like honestly, is that they don't have like a thing to point at and go, oh, there's an alternative. Like there's no. It's like tech way or the like no way, and like
here's another way. Where can people go to find more of your stuff?
So I have the YouTube channel, Chad A. Haag, Peak Oil Philosophy, and I have the 6 books on Amazon, available on paperback and ebook editions.
Awesome. Thank you very much again for coming on, Chad.
Last question. Do you have any like upcoming projects that you want to boom?
Plug or mention?
Yeah, I've been working on a book called Why I Am Not a Leftist. This is something which I kind of floated the idea like 2 years ago. And even like after 2 years, there were still people leaving comments because I think that's one of the most maybe surprising things for most people about the channel is there's an assumption that anyone talking about like academic stuff is just by default a leftist, right?
Yeah.
And certainly when I was in graduate school, I was like, if you had seen the original Chad Haag channel in say 2012 when I was in grad school, oh yeah, I was definitely repeating whatever I had to say on that campus in Boulder, which prides itself on trying to be like the most leftist place in the country. So there's an understanding that if you're talking about academic stuff, you have that sort of political view, but I think that leftist in the Kaczynskian sense of the term, not an ideology, but rather a psychological type of over-socialization and feelings of inferiority. This is something which I think could be explored in much greater depth as I will, try to do getting this book out. But it's also going to be a shorter book. I mean, the last book was 668 pages, and I saw a couple comments here and there about, oh, it's too long, blah, blah, which, I mean, no, I actually, I appreciate that sort of feedback. But the next book will kind of be short and fun and cheap, should be maybe 150 pages, maybe $7 when it's available. But yeah, it's just a great, opportunity, I guess, to be able to talk about things like this. In a way that I feel would not even be possible if you were working for a certain formal institution.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like I'm thinking like, hey, like I always had this thought experiment. Like, could you take an excerpt of Kaczynski's manifesto and get it published? And like he says something about a leftist every like 10 paragraphs. So there's no way in hell you'd get any sort of, because he always is like, oh, and by the way, don't forget about these evil academics that are spoiling everything, So it's just like, yeah, no, it's just funny to think about. Like there's a lot of stuff that's just like automatically filtered out by the institutions that are like, nope, we don't want that thought speak. We don't want those thoughts in our space.
So we're happy to promote some more people that are on the other side of that. And I think we're all looking really forward to that book.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to that book.
Thanks again, Chad. And we hope to have you on again. This was
awesome. This was, I had a lot of, if you can't tell, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a great talk. It's so difficult to have that sort of discussion really anywhere these days. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.